Hello ladies and gentlemen and movie lovers of all kind, and welcome back to the channel. As always, I am your host, Brett Murphy, and for today's video, it is going to be another Cinema Showdown. And it is a huge one that I have planned for you today, folks. It is going to be the Harry Potter franchise versus the Lord of the Rings Trilogy. For those of you who have been lifers on my channel following it from the very beginning or somewhere around then, you might remember that the very first Cinema Showdown I ever did was Harry Potter versus Lord of the Rings. Now, if you go back and try to find that video, you're not gonna have any luck, as I made it private a while ago. And that's primarily because when I look back on it, I really don't love it. I feel that myself as a creator, the channel as a whole, and the Cinema Showdown as a series have come a long way. And it's not that I'm necessarily ashamed of the video, it's just for such a big one, Harry Potter and the Lord of the Rings, I feel that it needs to be done much better than it was. So, before we hop into the actual Cinema Showdown itself, I just wanted to let you all know that I have an entire playlist dedicated to all of my Cinema Showdowns. So be sure to check that out, and I guarantee you'll find something you like. And so, without further ado, let's hop right into things. Round 1. Characters. When it comes to the characters of Harry Potter, of course we have to start off with the big three, being Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, and of course, the chosen one, the boy who lived himself, the lightning scar-bearing Harry Potter. Over the course of the 8-movie and 10-year span, we quite literally got to see these three grow up, both in terms of character development and actually aging before our very eyes and becoming adults. Their bond is one of the most beautiful things in cinema history, each with their own unique personality, wonderful chemistry, and unforgettable adventures. Alongside them are countless memorable side characters like Hagrid, Dumbledore, Professor Snape, Professor McGonagall, Draco Malfoy, Neville Longbottom, Sirius Black, Mad-Eye Moody, the list goes on and on. As for the Lord of the Rings trilogy, it's a bit of a different story. We are introduced to the Fellowship of the Ring, which consists of 9 members, and as the journey goes on, they get split into 3 separate groups. You would think this wouldn't give us enough time to get to know each very well, but thanks to these films' incredibly lengthy runtimes, it ends up being the exact opposite. The Fellowship, of course, consists of Frodo, Sam, Merry, Pippin, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Gandalf, and Boromir. They too have an unbreakable bond. Despite them being apart the majority of the trilogy, when they're all together they feel like family. Their love for one another feels genuine in the journey they go on. The sacrifices they make give us some of the greatest character moments we've ever had on our screens. Though we don't spend much time with many other characters, there are a few standouts like Smeagol aka Gollum, King Theoden, Lord Elrond, Galadriel, Bilbo Baggins, and Arwen, among others. It is incredibly difficult for me to choose between these two franchises, and I fear that it's going to be that way for every round. When it comes to the characters of these movies, it's like trying to pick your favorite family members. I've grown up with both of these franchises, both of them right around the same time. But since I have to give it to one of them, I'm going to be giving round 1 to Harry Potter. There really is no big spiel here on why I'm choosing one over the other. This one is going to be different for everyone, but I just feel a deeper connection to Harry and the gang as I grew up alongside them. Sure, I may be a bit younger than them, but growing up, I was that kid with glasses. So I've always felt that extra sense of connection, and I've always had a deep love for these characters, and that's why I'm giving round 1 to them. Round 2. Journey. The main focus of this grand 8-movie and 7-book journey all really boils down to Harry versus Voldemort. The boy who lived versus he who shall not be named. The chosen one versus the Dark Lord. That's really what it comes down to. Each movie in the first half of the franchise is about Voldemort trying to return to his physical form and our main trio trying to stop him. The second half of the franchise is about each side trying to build up their armies, which all concludes in an all-out war, which of course results in Harry and Voldemort finally clashing one last time. There are plenty of side plots here and there, but the other big focus is just quite literally these characters growing up, learning the ropes of life, friendship, relationships, heartbreak, pride, joy, fear, love, loss, all of it as they grow from age 11 to 17 or so. while they spend their 7 years at Hogwarts. The Lord of the Rings has a story with much higher stakes, at least in my mind. The main story for this can be boiled down quite simply to Frodo must journey across Middle-earth to Mount Doom to cast the One Ring into the fire, destroying what remains of Sauron, the Dark Lord of this universe, who is also trying to return to a physical form. Our main group gets split up for the majority of the trilogy. Frodo and Sam venture to Mordor, Merry and Pippin are captured by orcs, and after Boromir's death, the other three search for Merry and Pippin, and are determined to keep the Eye of Sauron and the forces of Mordor off of Frodo and Sam and on them. This one is another excruciatingly painful round to choose. Both journeys are epic in their own ways. What makes me want to give Harry Potter the edge in this round is that it's not just the main story that we focus on, it's also the journey of life, and watching these characters grow up, just like the actors themselves. However, I will indeed be giving this second round to The Lord of the Rings. There's just nothing else out there that compares to the sheer size, scope, scale, epicness, and magnitude of The Lord of the Rings. I mean, the fate of their entire world rests on the shoulders of two hobbits throwing a little golden ring into a volcano. But what ensues is truly the most grand and breathtaking journey in cinema history. Round 3. Villains. Harry Potter has a surprisingly large catalog of villains. Of course, our main villain is the Dark Lord himself, Tom Marvolo Riddle, or better known as Lord Voldemort. Alongside him are his band of merry Death Eaters. We don't get to know all of them very well, but his main and most prominent followers are Bellatrix Lestrange, Peter Wormtail Pettigrew, Lucius Malfoy, Fenrir Greyback, and Barty Crouch Jr. Oh, and who could forget about the magnificently unbearable Dolores Umbridge? When it comes to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, it is a bit more of a tricky situation. Their main villain is just really a giant flaming eye on top of a tower. Of course, he wasn't always this way, but in these movies, that's all he is. It is his most loyal follower, the great wizard Saruman, played brilliantly by the late Christopher Lee, that takes on the physical role of villainy alongside the apparently endless forces of orcs from Mordor and Isengard. There are some main orcs that we follow, but they're just orcs really. And then of course you have the ominous and cloaked Nazgul and the Witch King of Angmar. And if you want to, you could also include Gollum. It's a close one here as well. Even though Sauron doesn't return to his physical and all-powerful form, and just remains a giant, flaming, floating eye for the whole trilogy, he still manages to almost win by corrupting the minds of some of the most powerful in Middle-earth. Saruman too is a worthy opponent, and a great villainous character. But I'm going to be giving this round to Harry Potter. Voldemort, I would argue, is just as evil as Sauron, and he also manages to regain his physical form, while also corrupting the minds of many to join his forces. And he arguably would have won if it weren't for a key few events and flaws within his master plan. Ralph Fiennes is marvelous in the role, and Voldemort is among the greatest villains in cinematic and novelized history. The others are just the cherries on top of an already fully iced cake. Round 4. Aesthetic. I couldn't decide on just one of the phenomenal aspects of either of these iconic franchises, because each of these categories all deserve a ton of love and attention. The visual effects, to the makeup, to the set and costume design. It's all wonderful and very clearly among the best in the industry. Harry Potter transports us to both London and the wizarding world of the 90s. Of course though, we spend the vast majority of our time exploring the many great halls, classrooms, corridors, and secret locations inside the walls of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, alongside its surrounding grounds. The set design is impeccable, and the real-world locations are equally so. The costume design too is marvelous, from the various house-appropriate school robes to the intricate style of each individual prominent character. The makeup isn't too much to look at, as most that would be done via makeup is done through CGI, like the removal of Voldemort's nose to replace it with snake-like slits. As for the visual effects themselves, I mean, they get better as they go. You look back at those first two movies in particular, and it can be rough. You could use the excuse that they're older, but The Lord of the Rings came out around the same time, folks. As the movies go on, they do improve with the odd bit of goofiness and a splash of the uncanny valley here and there, but for the most part, they're solid. As for The Lord of the Rings, I mean, you don't need to spend very long in Middle-earth to be impressed by the magnificent work that these teams put into each and every last little aspect and detail of this world. I mean, the world of Middle-earth quite literally jumps right off the pages and onto our screens. What impresses me the most about these movies to this very day is that the vast majority of these movies were done practically. All of the orcs are just straight up makeup. Yeah, it's all practical. Even all of the wigs, beards, feet, and ears are all practically done too. The costume design is truly wondrous, as each region and race in this world has their own distinct styles and look. The set design is one of a kind. As I said, this world truly comes to life unlike any other, with great castle halls, dark and dreary caves, and epic battlefields. The visual effects still hold up today. Hell, some of it looks better than things released today. Most of the visual effects are used for things that just couldn't be done practically, like giant trolls, the Balrog, and other such creatures. Aside from that, VFX are used for just simply widening the vast landscapes of the stunning New Zealand. Because yes, most of this was shot on location as well, alongside very cleverly using miniature sets. So really, I guess you could say that's all done practically too. Oh yeah, and then there's Smeagol aka Gollum, a fully motion captured character. This technique had been used before, but not to this extent, and certainly not this well. As much as I love the design, look, and feel that Hogwarts and the wizarding world as a whole gives me, it's just plainly and simply no contest. Nothing can compete with The Lord of the Rings in any of these mini categories. Therefore, round 4 is going to go to The Lord of the Rings, without any shred of a doubt in my mind. Round 5. Legacy. Oh boy. I was dreading getting to this last round because, I mean, who can really know? Who can really say which of these franchises has had and will have a greater, longer lasting legacy? We could look to the numbers, for instance. Harry Potter has an average Metacritic score of 73.75, whereas The Lord of the Rings has an average Metacritic score of 91. Okay, how about average IMDb audience score? Harry Potter holds a 7.7, and The Lord of the Rings has an average of 8.8. As of this recording, all 3 Lord of the Rings movies are in IMDb's top 15 of all time. 2 of them are in the top 10. Only 1 of the Harry Potter movies is in it at all, and it's at number 211 currently. The Harry Potter franchise has an average Rotten Tomatoes score of 84.38%, whereas The Lord of the Rings has an average of 93.33%. The Harry Potter franchise as a whole was nominated for 12 Oscars, but didn't take home a single one. The Lord of the Rings movies were nominated for a staggering 30 Oscars and won 17, with the third film alone, The Return of the King, going 11 for 11, including Best Picture. The Harry Potter franchise raked in $8 billion at the worldwide box office over its 8-movie run. The Lord of the Rings trilogy made nearly $3 billion worldwide in 3 movies. The first Harry Potter book debuted in 1997, whereas the first Lord of the Rings book debuted in 1954. And both movie franchises premiered in 2001. But what it all boils down to at the end of it is how these movies make their audiences feel. The messages they pull from them, the memories that they make, how much they care about the characters, how much they enjoy the journey, and just plainly and simply, how much they love these movies. Everyone knows that money, awards, ratings aren't everything. Not to mention, it's kind of tough in some of these comparisons when you're comparing 8 movies to 3. At the end of the day, this one is going to come down to personal preference above all else, more than any of the other rounds that I just mentioned. There are die-hard Harry Potter fans across the world, and there are die-hard Lord of the Rings fans across the world. For me personally, I grew up with both of these franchises. I started them both around the exact same time at the age of 4 or 5. I mean, I got them all on VHS on the same Christmas morning. The first 3 Harry Potter movies and the 3 Lord of the Rings Trilogy movies. I love them equally, but at the end of the day, I would be cheating you, the audience, if I called it a draw or a tie. And I simply just can't do that, so I have to pick one. In my mind, the Lord of the Rings trilogy is my favorite and the best movie trilogy of all time. The Harry Potter franchise as a whole is simply among my favorites. Definitely towards the top, but not number 1. The Lord of the Rings trilogy has already stood the test of time. The movies stopped releasing in 2003, and the first book was released back in the 1950s and is still getting new readers each and every day across the world. They won all of those awards for a reason. They have such high ratings for a reason. And all 3 of the Lord of the Rings movies are 10 out of 10s for me. As much as I love the Harry Potter franchise with a deep-seated passion, and I always will, I'm gonna have to give this 5th and final round and the crown to the Lord of the Rings. So that is all for today's video, folks. Be sure to let me know down in the comments if you agree or disagree with my winner. While you're at it, feel free to let me know how you would score each and every one of these rounds and what Cinema Showdown you'd like to see me do next. If you enjoyed that video, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And if you'd like to see more content, consider subscribing to my channel and ringing that little bell icon. That way you can be notified about all of my latest uploads. And as always, stay safe. Thank you so much for watching. And that's a wrap. Hey you, yeah you, if you made it this far, just know I appreciate you, and while you're here, consider hitting that subscribe button.